chapters?
Yes, sir.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna run through the teacher's guide. I'm gonna just run over some things and review things. If you have any questions, you have any comments, you have anything you wanna expand upon, by all means, get into some really good discussions or whatever, but is that okay with you guys?
Yes, sir.
All right. Your objectives. Describe what makes air power unique. Define air and space power. Can anybody tell me what makes air power unique? Okay. Can anybody define air and space power? Go ahead.
Sir, I believe air and space power is the ability to effectively and efficiently use air and space for, well, anything you need to use it for.
Okay. Recognize the various legends of flight. Okay. Legends of flight. Okay. Like, you know what that means? Anybody? Who was a legend in flight? Yes.
Leonardo da Vinci, sir.
Okay. What did he do?
He created the first helicopter of sorts. It was a screw, but and he developed plans for gliders, helicopters, and many other devices. So.
Parachutes. Okay. What was the one thing that was unique about, or I don't know if it's unique or not, but I mean, what? Never mind, I'll just say it. The problem with Leonardo da Vinci was, what was it, 300 or 400 years?
300 years.
300 years. He wrote all the stuff down in a journal, but nobody ever found it until 300 years after he wrote the stuff. So all those times that people could have used his ideas to expound on, they lost 300 years of that. And the other legends you can think of. Yes.
Chuck Yeager, sir.
Okay.
General Mitchell, sir.
Okay. What do you do?
When aviation was about to die out at the end of World War I, he pushed Congress and the United States government to invest in aviation because he saw the importance of it.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Wright brothers, sir.
Okay, what'd they do?
They were the first powered flight.
Is that true?
They made the first successful flight.
Okay.
Powered.
Anybody else? Yes.
Sir, there was one who supposedly went to the moon.
Yes,
That
we
we later found out that his craft exploded.
what did he? Okay. In fact, I was reading one of the posts that somebody emailed about that and saying about how, yes, it was a ridiculous theory and this, that, and everything else, but don't forget, way back when, they didn't know about the vacuum of space. They didn't know how far away the moon was from Earth. They didn't know how long it was. I mean, I remember as a kid looking up at the moon and saying, "Oh man, getting on an airplane, just head towards it, and you're gonna get to it. You're gonna get there," without knowing that it was a couple million miles away or 1,000 miles away or whatever. It just you didn't realize that. These people didn't realize that either. So when they came up with the crazy idea of putting rockets on a chair and launching yourself into space, they didn't have any clue. They were just, it was an idea that they thought of, and they went and did it. Okay, the Chinese invention that solved one of the major problems of air power. Anybody? Yes.
So the compass.
The Chinese invented the compass?
Yes, sir.
I don't think so. Anybody else?
The Chinese invented gunpowder, and more specifically to aerospace rockets.
Okay. Colonel, you have something to say?
What you said.
Oh, sure, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, it was him. He's over that, oh, yes.
So they invented kites.
There you go. Okay. They actually made kites big enough that a man could hang from the kite and they would launch him up so he could look over battlefield and stuff, remember? Okay. Identify contributions the Chinese made to advance, oh, we already did that, okay. Identify the significant contributions that advanced air and space power. Identify significant contributions that advanced air and space power. Recall the individual scientists and researchers and their experiments. Anybody have any ideas? Okay. Air power has a distinctively rich history. It's fascinating to study the early pioneers and how their imaginations took flight. How did it all begin? That's what we're here to talk about. Going back in the beginning is so important because it is, gives us an opportunity to see where things happened, how things happened, and who did those wonderful things. For instance, look at our space program. Look around you today. It seems like so many take flying for granted. People just get in a car, go to the airport, jump in an airplane, and go wherever, and they don't even think anything of it. Can you imagine somebody from the past, like even George Washington's day or something like that, gets transported here through time and walks out to the ramp and sees some of those planes out there, sees one taking off or landing, how that would affect his mind. Our space program, we went a long way from the Chinese guys strapping rockets to his chair to the space shuttle, okay, or the Saturn V that made it to the moon. All right. I don't know if this is going to be a whole, I'm going to try to make it not a whole hour, but it says we're going to take a look at some of the early legends of flight, discuss the early scientific research, and we'll get into early airplane developments, ending with the Wright brothers. Okay. The Chinese invented the kite and invented gunpowder, used gunpowder for rockets, and Wan Hu is the guy we talk about going up in space in a chair. The Greeks and the Romans, you see some of the Greek gods or the Roman gods, like Mercury, Pegasus. He had wings, like Mercury had wings on his ankles. Okay, Pegasus was a horse with wings. Okay, Icarus and Daedalus. Everybody know who Icarus and Daedalus are? Come on, you guys read this stuff. You should know who Icarus and Daedalus are.
Sir, according to Greek legends, they were trapped in the labyrinth, but they took some feathers, attached them with wax, tried to fly away, but then Icarus flew too near the sun, the wax melted, and he fell into the sea.
Okay. Persian king Alexander the Great. Persian king supposedly had a flying throne. Alexander flew in a cage drawn by winged griffins. Anybody know what a griffin is?
Sir, I believe it is a half bird, half horse type of animal.
Close.
Sir, I believe it is a half lion, half bird.
Yep. Of course, that's mythical. You know, we never seen a real griffin. Okay. Man always looked up at the sky and watched the birds flying around. They always wanted to fly, but couldn't, so they had to make machines. Early in basic scientific research, Leonardo da Vinci was an Italian artist, architect, and man of science. He devoted his life to mysteries of flying. He gave the world descriptions and pictures of flying machines He died in 1519. His manuscripts were not found and published until 300 years later. Beginning with the 1500s and through the 1700s, there are many stories, books, and research written about flight. In 1670, a Jesuit priest, Rango de Lana, wrote about an aerial ship. In 1709, another Jesuit priest invented the hot air balloon. In 1766, English chemist Henry Cavendish discovered flammable air, which was later known as, or later called as hydrogen. In 1783, Golfier brothers demonstrated a hot air balloon. They worked with oxygen, precisely discovered. They thought a new gas was being created by the burning fuel, so they called it Golfier gas. Also, whether it was the air was being heated. Okay. First two men to fly in a lighter-than aircraft rode in the Montegolfier balloon. They were, I can't even pronounce these guys' names. First flight lasted 25 minutes and covered 5 miles. Do you know what they did? Anybody know what they did? Okay. People didn't see the picture of the balloon. What they did was they had an envelope. And they had a basket or a gondola or whatever, but it was hollow in the middle. And they built a fire underneath. Okay. Fire filled up, heated the air inside the envelope, made it lighter than air, lighter than regular air, and it brought the balloon up. In fact, at some point they figured out a way to keep the fire going inside the basket. They were using, I forget what they said. Anybody remember what they said? What they were using for fuel? Yes.
So were they using hydrogen in the beginning?
No. This was, they built a fire and heated the air. Okay? So the only problem was when they were to go long distance, they had to carry a whole lot of combustible fuel, like hay or twigs or whatever, to keep the fire going. Nowadays we use propane for their balloons. Okay. Back in the old days, they didn't have that. So. Okay. Between 1783 and 1790, balloons became very popular in Europe. In 1785, a French balloonist, Jean-Pierre Blanchard, and his American passenger, Dr. John Jeffries, flew across the English Channel. In 1793, the American balloon flight occurred in Philadelphia, the first American balloon flight. President George Washington and thousands watched. In 1797, Andre Jacques Gardner made the first parachute jump from a balloon. The first use of balloons by the United States military happened when? Anybody know?
The Civil War, sir.
Civil War. And what were they used for?
I'm not sure, sir.
Viewing the enemy at a long distance.
Okay.
And finding out where their movements are, seeing which direction they're coming.
Intelligence gathering. Okay, yeah. Luckily, nobody thought of shooting the balloons down, so that was a nice thing, you know, so. In 1852, Henry Gifford built the first generally credited successful dirigible. Does anybody know the difference between a balloon and a dirigible?
Sir, a dirigible can actually be controlled, and a balloon, you're just at the mercy of the wind.
Okay,
Durable is actually football shaped.
okay. You wouldn't have any hands up down here? No? Okay. Yes, but I think the first dirigibles, they weren't controllable. They just had that, the oblong shape to it. But later on, someone thought of a great idea of putting a propeller on the one end and having it push. Of course, they still didn't know how to steer it yet, so, but eventually they worked all that out. Let's see. All right, then later on, in the 1900s, they started building Zeppelins. Or rather, yeah, rigid dirigibles. Okay. Dirigible is, nowadays a dirigible would be like the Goodyear blimp. Okay. There's no infrastructure. There's no ribs. There's no solid framework. It's just an empty envelope that's filled with helium. Right? Has anybody ever seen the movie Hindenburg? Okay. Has anybody seen, well, I guess they showed the, actually they took some of the clips from the actual news reels and put that into the film. But if you ever saw the movie the Hindenburg at the end, of course it explodes. That's what made it so infamous. I was coming into New Jersey during a thunderstorm. Of course, there's a lot of theories and stuff about what happened actually, but the working theory is that during a thunderstorm, lightning struck the Hindenburg, and that ignited some of the helium, and there it went. But if you would see how the thing fell from the sky and it was burning, you could see the framework of the dirigible, of the Zeppelin. That huge envelope, which is skin over a skeleton of steel or aluminum beams and stuff. And they actually had compartments with huge envelopes of hydrogen inside of it. And that's what lifted the Zeppelin up. Developing the airplane, pioneers struggled with developing lift, sustaining lift, and controlling aircraft. George JCAEA was the first 19th century airplane pioneer. He constructed a whirling arm device and tested types of wings. Have you ever driven down the highway and stuck your hand out the window? And then moved your hand this way, your hand would go up, move your hand like this, go down, and then if you pulled your hand too far back, it'd be thrown back. You ever do that? Okay? That's basically how a wing works. Okay? If you change the angle of attack of a wing, it's going to force your hand up and create lift. If you change the angle of attack to down, it's going to force you down. Okay? Well, that's what this guy was doing with this circular arm that he was working on. He built models and then laid down the foundation for modern aeronautics with his published account of making a surface support of given weight by the application of power and the resistance of air. He identified the forces of lift, drag, and thrust. Actually, there's 4 forces against an airplane. Lift, gravity, thrust, and drag. Okay? He built the first successful full-size manned glider. And there was a John Montgomery built a 40-pound man-carrying glider with wings like a seagull. It carried him 600 feet aloft. In 1905, he unveiled his new glider to the public. The glider stayed aloft for 20 minutes. Every time these guys worked, they kept on improving, and they kept on expanding the duration of flight. Okay. Otto Lilienthal, author of modern aviation, he built single-wing and two-wing gliders. He built an engine to link the wingtips. and built a pilot just around the world. Octave Chanute with Lilienthal's worked and improved on them. He designed gliders but was too old to fly them, so he got somebody else to do the flying for him. He is known mostly for his careful study of aviation history, collection, and distribution of aviation information. In 1843, W.S. Henson and John Stringfellow received a patent for a man-carrying powered aircraft. He called it the Ariel. The Ariel was never built, but considered a masterpiece of engineering. In 1948, Stringfellow built a steam-driven model that did fly. Samuel Pierpont Langley attempted to add power to a glider. In 1903, the aerodrome was launched by a catapult from a barge anchored in the Potomac River, but it fell into the river. The same thing happened on the next two tries. The next try 2 months later, rather. Both attempts were widely covered by the press. The government dropped the support, and Langley gave up on his project. Finally, we come to the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur. Achieved success in controlled, sustained, and powered flight. Okay. Their approach was to first develop an aircraft that would fly and then control it in flight. They developed the wing warping technique. Anybody know what the wing warping technique is?
He used a tilt of the hip in order to change the direction of the plane. At first, it warped one wing down and one wing up in order to turn, and then they developed a rudder, and it just moved the rudder.
Okay. Anybody else?
So wing warping is when the wings themselves are actually twisted in one direction or the other to control the direction, the
Right.
roll.
This is my wing, okay? Before they had ailerons, they would actually twist the wing so that the one side would go up and the other side would go down. Or they would twist it this way, and this side would go up and that side would go down, and that would cause the airplane to roll. Later on, they created the little chassis or whatever they laid in, and they could twist and control that and the rudder. Okay. By October 1902, they had over 1,000 successful glider flights, and then they had solved all the major control problems. Now they needed a suitable power plant. By December 17, 1903, the flyer flew for 12 seconds and 120 feet. Later that same day, a flight lasted 59 seconds and 852 feet. All right, some multiple choice and true-false questions. See if you guys understood what you read. Who is credited with inventing gunpowder?
Chinese.
Okay. Who is the great artist, architect, man of science, and conducted the first scientific experiments in the field of aviation? Okay, everybody.
Leonardo.
There you go. All right. The first use of balloons by the United States military occurred during when?
The Civil War, sir.
Okay. Who built and flew the world's first successful rigid dirigible? Rigid dirigible. Okay. Was it Jean-Pierre Blanchard? Was it Henry Cavendish? Was it Alberto Santos Dumont? Or was it Ferdinand von Zeppelin?
Sir, Zeppelin.
Right. who has been called the father of modern aviation. Octave Chanute, Samuel Pierpont Langley, Otto Lilienthal, or Roper Wright.
Am I right, sir?
I believe so. Which one of the following statements about the Wright brothers is not true? They wanted to first develop an aircraft that would fly and could be controlled in flight, then add a power plant. B, they felt they had to get into the air themselves to further test their wing warping technique. C, on their first attempt to fly, Wilbur was at the controls. The flyer became airborne, but stalled and fell back into the sand. It was slightly damaged. On October 17, 1903, the flyer flew for 2 minutes and 1,200 feet. Which one was not true?
The last one, was that a question? I mean, was that another one? Was that another, like, choice? Like,
Yes,
is it-
on December 17th.
that one is false.
Okay. That is correct. True or false? The first man to fly in a lighter-than-air aircraft rode a Montgolfier balloon into the air over Paris on November 21st, 1783. True or false? Come on, you got a 50-50 chance. Yeah.
False.
It's true. In 1903, the aerodrome, built by Samuel Pierpont Langley, was launched by catapult from a barge on the Potomac River. It did not fly and fell into the river. True or false?
True, sir.
Right. The first balloon flight in the United States took place in 1793 with President George Washington and Benjamin Franklin on board. The balloon ride lasted over 1 hour, and both Washington and Franklin landed safely. True or false? Lieutenant.
False, sir.
Okay. True or false? A dirigible is defined as a heavier-than aircraft that cannot be steered.
False, sir.
Correct. I love it when they give me the answers. I'm good. Okay. Any discussion on what we discussed so far? Yes?
Earlier, the father of modern aviation was asked. It's actually Otto Lilienthal.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't really sure about that one, but that's why I said I thought so. But thank you for correcting me. Anybody else have anything that's discuss about the early introduction to air power? Okay, we're going on to the adolescence of air power from 1904 to 1919. I'm going to strip the objectives, just get into it. This chapter looks at the continued development of air power as it moves into adolescence. The years in 1904 to 1919 mark a time when people were becoming interested in flying, but they didn't realize the uses of airplanes. Now you got to remember, all these people that did all these crazy things throughout history, people took all that information and put it into their ideas. Like Wilbur and Orville Wright, they took some of the stuff that people that worked on earlier with kites and with gliders and stuff like that, and they used it and worked it with their ideas, and that's how these things happen, where you take somebody's work that publishes their work, okay? So you're not stealing anything from these people. If the guy publishes a paper, it's open for interpretation or whatever. You can take that information and you can build on it with your own ideas, okay? it should be interesting to look at what has happened, what was happening in the development of the airplane in the United States and compare that to the progress occurring in Europe. So let's we're going to discuss this continuing development of the airplane and see how different countries handle this new invention. Okay? The developments in the United States. In 1904 to 1905, the Wright brothers continued their experiments and perfected their aircraft. In October 1905, they flew 38 minutes and covered over 24 miles. The flight ended only when they ran out of fuel. In 1905, the Wright brothers offered to build an aircraft for the American government, but the government was afraid of another embarrassment like the Langley failures. After the government turned down the Wright brothers 3 times, the Wrights gave up trying to sell their invention to the government. However, President Theodore Roosevelt directed the Secretary of War to ask the Wright brothers to test an airplane that could carry a plane, passenger, and fuel for 125 miles, plus the plane had to fly at 36 miles per hour. Orville began building a new plane and Wilbur went to France. Wilbur signed a $100,000 contract to form a French aircraft company, building company. In 1908, Orville had completed 12 successful flights when tragedy struck. In the 13th test on Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, a passenger died when the propeller broke and the airplane crashed. Orville was seriously hurt but recovered. Selfridge was the first man to lose his life in a powered airplane. In 1909, the Army bought its first plane from the Wright brothers for $25,000, plus a $5,000 bonus for exceeding the speed requirements. Prices on airplanes have gone up a little bit since then, but still, even for a privately owned little Cessna 182 or 172 or 152, I guess that's a little bit more than $25,000. That's what you can get for about $25,000. Okay. In 1907, Glenn Curtis became the fastest man on Earth when he set the motorcycle speed record of 136.3 miles per hour. Then he switched his interest to airplanes. Also in 1907, Curtis and Alexander Graham Bell founded the Aerial Experiment Association, designed and built several aircraft. One of them was the first American aircraft equipped with ailerons. Another aircraft was the first seaplane to be flown in the United States. In 1908, Curtis won the Scientific American Trophy in June bug. That was the name of the airplane. In 1909, Curtis won the Gordon Bennett Trophy in Golden Flyer. In 1910, President Theodore Roosevelt became the first president. Also in 1910, former President Theodore Roosevelt became the first president to fly. In 1911, William Randolph Hearst offered $50,000 for flying across the U.S. in 30 days. Calbreath Perry Rogers, on board the Fizz Flyer, completed the journey in 49 days and missed the prize money. In 1911, Harriet Quimby became America's first licensed female pilot. Meanwhile, in Europe, in 1904, Robert Ednall Peltry built a glider and used ailerons to replace the wind warping technique. In 1906, Alberto Santos Dumont flew the first powered airplane in Europe. 2 weeks later, he flew 722 feet and the press reported it in a positive manner. Europe was excited by the news. In 1907, Louis Leroux built and flew the world's first powered monoplane. In 1909, Leroux crossed the English Channel. Also in 1909, the first international air meet occurred in Reims, France. Many speed and endurance records were broken. In 1911, the Short brothers of England were granted patents for the world's first multi-engine aircraft. In It had 2 engines and 3 propellers, and was called the Triple Twin. In 1913, Igor Sikorsky built the first 4-engine aircraft. It was called the Garand. Laurent and Gustav Seguin developed a lightweight rotary engine called the Gnome. Many World War I aircraft used this engine. Flying vertical helicopters. A large propeller on top of the helicopter is made up of a number of blades. Each of these blades is like a wing. They move through the air, causing lift. Helicopters are called rotary wing aircraft because of the way the blades rotate. In 1907, Louis Brigade built and flew the first helicopter and lifted man into the air. In 1909, Emil and Henry Berliner became the first Americans to build and fly a helicopter. Commercial flying, the beginning. In 1914, the first briefly scheduled airline service using heavier-than aircraft started. This airline was called the St. Petersburg-Tampa Airboat Line. The airline flew 22 miles across Tampa Bay. It cost just $5. It took 20 minutes. By 1912, all the major modern countries of the world had formed military flying services. The U.S. military flying service was present in name only. By the end of 1913, the U.S. Army had 19 aircraft. By the end of 1913, the U.S. Army had 19 aircraft and 29 pilots. In Germany, at 1914, Germany had 200 aircraft. Britain and France possessed about 450. America was so far behind the Europeans, it was unbelievable. The U.S. entered the war in 1917, but didn't have any combat-worthy aircraft. Congress promised 263 American squadrons equipped with 22,625 aircraft to be in action by June 1918. However, when the war ended in November 1918, there were only 45 American squadrons. They were all flying British and French aircraft. Not a single American-designed combat aircraft saw action in World War I. The military role of the airplane. At the start of 1914, the average plane speed was 70, 80 miles an hour and fly no higher than 10,000 feet. When the war ended, the average speed was 140 to 150 miles an hour. It could fly up to 24,000 feet. The airplane was first used in war for observation. Next, it was used as a bomber with a pilot or an observer carrying bombs in their laps. Sort of like Civil Air Patrol when we went after the submarines. You had these guys flying around these little yellow airplanes and they'd hang out the window and drop bombs on the submarines. Europe in World War I. At the beginning of World War I, Germany had 20 large dirigibles and produced 88 more during the war. Germany planned to use them as strategic bombers against French and English cities. They were accurate bombers, but they were also highly flammable, so they were mainly flown at night. British fighters were called back from the war in France to help protect British cities from the dirigibles. Fighter development. There was a clear need for more fighters and pursuit aircraft to drive off the bombers. In 1915, a French pilot, Roland Garros, mounted an automatic rifle on his aircraft and fired to the propeller. The Germans captured Garros and his plane and asked Dutch airplane designer Anthony Fokker to improve on this design. Fokker designed a machine gun that fired to the spinning propeller. This gave the Germans almost total control of the air for about a year. If you remember from your reading, Fokker designed a gear that would be able to tell when the space was between the propeller and the machine that could fire through. So you weren't actually hitting the blade of the props, you were actually shooting through. By 1916, the Allies captured a German plane and were able to copy the machine gun design. First all-metal low-wing monoplane fighter called the Junker D-1. It was too late to make much of a difference in this war, but it was the fighter of the future. Fighter aces. The French developed a method of recognizing pilots who shot down enemy aircraft. They used the term ace for a pilot who shot down 5 enemy aircraft. The British and the Americans used the same criteria. The Germans, however, required 10 enemy aircraft down for an ace to be used. The United States in World War I, the U.S. entered the war in 1917. Lafayette Escadrille, an American citizens who flew with the French Air Service before America entered the war. Lee Rickenbacker was the leading American ace of World War I with 26 kills and only 5 months of flying. He killed 26 planes. He was the only American to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor during World War I. Billy Mitchell, an American aviator who got his start in World War I, and later became the leading enthusiast for aviation, air power, and the airplane's role as an offensive weapon. There's a movie a while back about these during World War I, and talked about the fighter pilots. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was interesting to see what they did and how they flew these little airplanes in the sky and did the air combat stuff. Okay, we're going to do some multiple choice and true-false sample test questions again. Some of these questions might be in the actual test. So, in the early 1900s, the Wright brothers signed a contract with the U.S. Army to build an airplane. While Orville was working on the contract, what was Wilbur doing? Yes.
He was in France, sir.
Okay. Choices are Wilbur was working with him on the contract. B, Wilbur was teaching President Roosevelt how to fly. C, Wilbur was back home in Dayton, Ohio, working on a more advanced airplane. D, Wilbur was in France demonstrating the airplane for European governments. That was D. The first powered dirigible in the United States used a blank engine. A Bell engine. B, a Curtiss engine. C, a Lam engine. Or D, a Wright engine.
Sir, I believe it used a Curtiss engine.
Correct. Who won the 1908 Scientific American Trophy and the 1909 Gordon Bennett Trophy? Is it Glenn Curtiss, Galbraith Rogers, Harriet Quimby, or Wilbur Wright?
Curtis, sir?
I think so. Unfortunately, they're not giving me the right answers, so I'm just guessing that's on there, not just you guys are. In 1911, who became America's first licensed female pilot? Bessie Coleman, Amelia Earhart, or Phoebe Only, or Harriet Quimby? Yep. I had to go for that one. Young lady?
I believe Harriet Quimby.
Okay. Who built the first powered monoplane and also built 11 planes before getting one that could cross the English Channel? Louis Leroux, Alberto Santos Dumont, Galbraith Rogers, or Glenn Curtiss? Anyone?
Was it Glenn Curtiss?
I don't think so. Glenn was he was an American. Okay, well, that's one question you guys are gonna have to study up on. Unless you happen to have the answer. Oh, okay. Who designed and flew the first 4 engine aircraft? Glenn Curtiss, Paul Cornu, Alberto Santos Dumont, or Igor Sikorsky?
Igor Sikorsky, sir.
I think so. When World War I ended, the speed of aircraft had increased to blank miles per hour and could operate up to what? How much in feet? Your choices are 50 to 60 at 10,000, 70 to 80 at 10,000, 100 to 120 at 20,000, or 140 to 150 at 24,000.
D, sir.
D, as in dog.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Who were the Lafayette Escadrille Group? Were they a group of Frenchmen who flew in World War I? Were they a group of Americans who flew for the France in World War I? Were they an elite group of French Foreign Legion, or were they a group of Frenchmen and women who led the resistance movements in World War I?
D, sir.
Group of Americans who flew for the French. That's correct. True or false? Orville Wright was the first man to lose his life in a powered airplane. Everybody.
False.
President Theodore Roosevelt was the first U.S. president to fly. True or false? Now, lady.
True, sir.
Right. Okay, that's it for chapter 2. We'll take a 5-minute break. A, New York City and Chicago. B, New York City and Washington, D.C. C, Chicago and Cleveland. Or D, Chicago and San Francisco.
B, sir.
Okay. Yes. Who was the first person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean solo? Amelia Earhart, Bessie Coleman, Charles Lindbergh, or Billy Mitchell? Everybody. Okay. Now, do you guys know who Charles Lindbergh is? Huh?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm talking about these guys back here. And they're sitting there. In 1915, President Woodrow Wilson formed an organization whose purpose was to supervise and direct the scientific study of the problems of flight with a view of their practical solutions. What was the name of this organization? A, National Aeronautical Association. B, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. C, National Civil Aeronautics Authority. Or D, Civil Aeronautics Administration.
Delta, sir.
Pardon me?
D, sir.
Wrong.
C.
Wrong again. Oh, we just got rid of 2 of them.
A, sir.
Wrong again. All right. So the answer was B, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Okay. True or false? B.B. Fairgrave Umley, the first licensed black female pilot. You didn't cover this that I talked about, but it's in the material that you read.
It was Bessie Coleman, sir.
So then that would be false.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. True or false? The Women's Air Derby led to the formation of an association of women flyers called the 99s.
True, sir.
Okay. The Tuskegee Airmen were a group of African-American pilots who flew in World War II. Who haven't I called on? Okay, back there.
True, sir.
All right, good. All right. That's the introduction of air power. Okay. Come on. golden age. There's one in the middle. The adolescence of air power. So it was introduction of air power, the adolescence of air power, and the golden age of air power. Any questions? Any comments? Anything you want to discuss? Besides, whoa, who, or whatever, in this flying chair. Anything else you guys want to talk about? Anything you want to know about? Any questions you might have about anything? Like how far is it from here to the sun? Okay. Yes.
In this course, are we going to be discussing Cold War aircraft?
Probably later on. I don't know what chapters those are, but I would imagine. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, critiques? Well, you guys are a great bunch of kids here. I'm sorry, cadets. It's good to see you Navy cadets here. I'm glad that you guys made it. By the way, I'm Major Bartholomew. I'm a former squadron commander of Squadron 801. I've been in Civil Air Patrol for about 25 years. I am a mission pilot, I'm not mission pilot, I'm a mission scanner and a mission observer. And I also do counter-narcotics flights as well. I really love this organization, and I'm glad to be here. So thank you very much for being such a wonderful class. Are you sure there's nothing else you want to talk about or discuss or ask or anything? Okay? Road test.